Well, welcome everyone. It's Saturday, November 20th, 2021. I'm Tom Zaczek, and this is the ARCI video meeting number 16. Thanks to all of you who have decided to show up today and participate in these great meetings we have. And we've got people from all over the country here, other clubs as well as ARCI, and it's great to have you all here today. Just a little note, our next meeting is December 18th and then January 15th of next year, and then we're going to skip April and go to March 19th. If you've got any feedback at all, please send it to that email address there. We'd love to hear from you, and if you have any ideas for a presentation, please do so. And before I turn this over to Matt, I'm going to mention that we do have a show and tell section of this meeting right after all the presentations. And if you have a show and tell, Matt's going to throw up a poll to ask you that so we can budget our time a little bit better. So with that being said, you can see the meeting protocol down there below, but I'll turn it over to Matt and he'll take it from there.
So we have a lot of the same faces. This is not new, so I'll just be very brief. We are recording for YouTube. All of our previous online meets are available up on YouTube. So as you're presenting, showing material, or just talking about it, remember that everyone on the internet has the opportunity to hear it. So keep that in mind. For that reason, we use the chat for stuff that we don't want to make completely public. And as an example of that, I will be posting next, or the invite actually, for our next online meet, and similar information for tomorrow's Mark online meet for you to be able to join that. The major item is, if you're showing a radio, don't leave it on a radio station that's playing music, because we'll get a copyright strike from YouTube. With that, I'm going to launch a quick poll to see if people are interested in doing a show and tell today. And we can just leave that up for a few minutes while Tom goes over the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So today we've got 3 presentations lined up. You can see the agenda right there. After we do those 3, we'll go into a show and tell portion, and that's what the poll is right about now. Matt is asking you if you have something you'd like to share with us. Our first presenter, David Kruh, has done several presentations for us and contributed many excellent articles to the ARCI newsletter. And he always does a great job and has a fascinating topic. And today he's going to talk about building his 160-meter ham band antenna. And I know we have a lot of amateurs in the audience. I heard a lot of that talk going on right before we started this recording. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to David.
Thanks very much, Tom. Thank you everybody. I'm going to now share my screen, and you should see nothing right now. So my ham call sign is WB2HTO. I've been, a matter of fact, it suddenly dawned on me that next July 2nd will be my 50th anniversary of getting a ham ticket. I started as a novice back in 1972. So it's just freaking me out. So I'm going to talk to you about an antenna that I built. But I want to tell you, I am not an expert on antennas, so you're not going to hear me make some, definitive, declarative sentence and say that this is the way something absolutely has to be. You won't hear me make any statements like that, except this one. And that's, I believe, is true for everybody. It's even true for one of the founders of Ericsson, who decided to build himself a 160-meter beam, basically taking, you can see, he basically had sections of tower welded together and placed on top of more towers that were welded together. It's an awesome station, which I also understand is no longer in operation. But I'm going to tell you right now, at some point, he thought, I could go 25 meters higher. I could go 50. I could do that. He just had to say, okay, enough is enough, for I only have so much money, even with all that Ericsson stock. But God bless him. Because as you can see from this aerial shot of my much more humble suburban lot here in Massachusetts, this is a classic 1/64 of an acre, 70 by 100 foot suburban lot. And so there's not a lot of room. So what I do mostly is run with dipoles, and I happen to love dipoles for a number of reasons. First and foremost is they're inexpensive. You know, you go to the Home Depot, you get a spool of wire, you get some dog bones, a little coax, and you're on the air. So they're really easy to design, F/468. Some, there's really easy formulas. They're so easy to install. I have a very reliable slingshot. They're easy to trim up should if you're looking to center on a particular frequency, the inevitable when they fall in a windstorm or a snowstorm. You don't need radials, so you don't have to be digging up your ground. And they do have a little gain. Now, it's a fixed direction, but you do get some gain. So I've had over the years a number of dipoles hanging from trees around my property, of varying lengths, cut for particular bands. And I've managed to, I've done okay. I've gotten worked all states, and on a few bands, even picked up 100 countries on all the traditional bands. I later got my worked all states for the WARC bands. And then there was 160 meters, which presented more of a challenge. This was the dipole that I was using for the lower bands, for 40 and for 80. As you can see, the antenna was only 25 feet off the ground, and I was running it through twin lead through a MFJ tuner. Didn't do very well. I think I collected 12, maybe 17 states. And it's not hard to understand why. With the antenna being so low, such a low fraction of 160 meters, most of my energy was going up and not out. And I had to do something about that. So my friend Woody, I'm guessing you hams have got to have WW1WW somewhere in your log. He runs an amazing station up in Salisbury, New Hampshire. And by the way, just going back about antennas being compromised, is he has 3 towers. They're all 197 feet tall. Why not over 200 feet? Because once you reach 200 feet, you have to adhere to FAA rules for lights, and he didn't want to deal with that. So there was his compromise. So I've got a small piece of property. I've got those trees that are such a small height. So I looked at some options for getting on 160, doing better than it was. They're inverted L's. I saw this really interesting design where somebody basically wrapped a very tall piece of PVC. They stuck this contraption up there for an antenna capacitive top hat. They ran a bunch of radials, and that looked interesting. And then, as I say, my friend Woody said, well, why don't you just try this, which is to take that dipole, twist the leads together and go through a balun, and then throw some radios on the ground and see how you do. So he ran through, he has the actual purchased version of EasyNet. So he's the one who ran the analysis of the dipole 25 feet off the ground. And this is what he came up with if we ran it as a vertical. As you can see, now I've got energy going to more horizontally rather than vertically. The capacitive top hat is mostly to the important one I always felt was to get more and current flowing to near the top of the antenna, so you get better radiation. And then, of course, what you need are radials. You need them to provide an RF current return path. And then the question becomes, how many radials? Again, another challenge I had was my property is kind of lopsided. The distance between the back of my house and my neighbor's property is only about 9 feet. And that's because the house was built long before they had so many of the zoning rules in my town. So I laid out 4 radials at ground level to at least get myself started. And this is what the antenna looked like. It's so there's the balun, there's the twisted lead, there's my coax leading back to the shack. I even stuck a ground into the. So there are 3 metrics that were important to figure out is the antenna really performing up to snuff. SWR, R, radiation resistance, and X reactance. SWR, as my friend Doug Grant, K1DG, many of you probably have him in your log, as he constantly reminds me, is SWR is simply a measure of how happy your transmitter is. So getting an antenna that matches the frequency is great. And the idea is to present that 50 ohm load to the transmitter so your transmitter is happy. X is that combination, every antenna's got a little capacitance, it's got some inductance, and both of those oppose alternating current. So you want to keep X as low as possible. And radiation resistance, because basically a vertical is basically a dipole that's been turned sideways. And so we need that other half of that dipole, other half of that antenna. And so you need a solid connection with your ground to reduce your radiation loss. Okay. So now let's see. So here's what I used: an MFJ 259 antenna analyzer. And here's what we came up with just those 4 radials, just the balun, and actually going through the antenna tuner. You can see that our SWR was dipped, unfortunately, above the 160 meter band. We wanted to be down here. So I was not happy. The antenna was not happy. The transmitter was not happy. So what we worked up was at the base, a coil. And Woody, who was my sensei during this project, he went back to EasyNet and he calculated 38 loops around a 2-inch piece of PVC. I thought I was very clever in hooking up an SO239 and a little banana plug so that I could remove and insert test equipment. I'll show you later how that kind of came back to bite me. But the point is, I hooked it up, I set it up, went back into the shack, and lo and behold, even without the tuner, with my 25-foot or so tall vertical, I had terrific SWR right down in the CW portion of 160 meters, which is exactly where I wanted to be. Reactance was also pretty good, down around 1810, 1820. It's exactly where I wanted to be. Here's the problem, though: the radiation resistance. I was losing energy because I was not getting all of my energy up into the antenna. You can see I was over 50 ohms all the way across the 160 meter band. I wanted to get that number down. So I needed to do better with getting a better radial system. So I did a lot of reading. One fellow suggested a spider. He said, it doesn't matter how long the radials are, just have lots of them. So I laid out a bunch of short radials underneath the coil. It really didn't help. And then I read this great article by Rudy Severance, N6LF. And the sentence that popped out at me was, a few elevated radials can work as well as a large number of ground radials. And also that the height really doesn't matter, from 1/2 to about 4 feet high. Well, that's great news for somebody like myself with my small piece of property, who, thanks to having a child and also getting a dog, we put up a fence around the property. And I already had a way to put radials about 3 feet off the ground. And so that's what I did. And here's what happened when I added that second layer of radials. Interesting. The SWR kind of shifted upwards and got a little higher. But you know what? This is without the tuner. I can throw this thing through the tuner and make my transmitter happy, even though, 1.5 to 1 is not bad. But look at what happens to reactance. It also shifted up to 1840. I would later come to appreciate that frequency when FT8 and FT9 and the other digital modes became popular. But here was the big win: resistance, which dropped upwards of 15 ohms within the section of the band that I was interested in working. So naturally, I thought, well, if one set of elevated radials worked, why not a second set of elevated radials? And this is what happened. And I'll be dipped if I can do the math, and even some fellows like my friend Woody wouldn't even attempt the math to figure out why is it when we added the second level of radials, the resistance actually went up. But it did. So I got rid of them. Decided instead to maybe look at digging some more radials. So I did a little more testing. And as it turns out, ultimately, 2 more radials allowed me to lower the resistance across the band and finally, optimize my performance at 160 meters. And so that was the result. You can see down around 30 ohms, pretty much across the portion of the band that I was interested in working. So with 8 radials, I was finally able to get on the air. I looked at doing more radial testing, but I reached that point of diminishing returns. Again, as I pointed out, my property is lopsided. The house is located off on one end of the property. I have problems. I mean, they're terrific neighbors, but there's only, as it is, I ended up borrowing one of my neighbor's trees so I could make a slightly longer antenna. So I really appreciate what they did. But, there's the issues of soil conductivity. There's pipes that are running all around, telephone cable lines. There's only, so much you can do to mitigate what is around your own property. So it was time actually to finally start operating. And what I did was, it took me a few years to reach worked all states, but a couple of winters ago, like 3 or 4 in the morning, I pulled in both Alaska and Hawaii on 160 meters from my little station here in Massachusetts. And I went from 12 entities, all of which were located here. I did get 1 South America, a few Caribbean, but right now I've got about 70, 75 actually now DX entities in my log, including, and I'm really impressed, Antarctica and New Zealand, almost 9,500 miles on 160 meters. So that's using FT8 running about 80 watts into the vertical. And that's the story of how I got on 160 meters effectively.
Wow, Dave, that's impressive.
Thank you.
Quite a journey, and well documented.
Thank you.
And well shared. I really appreciate that. And
Good.
I'm not an amateur, but having an engineering background, I really appreciate the type of solid engineering work you did to make that all happen. And,
Well, as I said, my sensei Woody was really helped drive this project, and so thank you. I'm glad. And as I say, the proof is in the results. You know, when I saw what is he ZL4AS, you know, completing a transaction, it blew my mind.
that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's,
Thank you, guys.
any questions that you'd like to ask Dave right now before we move to the next presentation?
I've got one.
Oh, yeah.
Being at about 160 meters, being at about 2 megahertz, I got to ask, have you ever hooked that puppy up to, you know, an old TRF or something to see how it does on the broadcast band?
No. Not a fan of the TRFs, but that's funny. Yeah. No. Oh, you mean have I hooked the antenna up to the radio? Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
used
yeah.
the 160. I've used the 160 meter antenna absolutely because you know the TRFs just have such crappy front ends. Yeah, that's the only way I can get a decent signal into them. I've got about 2 or 3 in the house. I'm not a big fan of the TRFs. Thank you, guys. Thank you, and thank you
All
for
right.
putting me on first because I have some other things I got to get to. I appreciate it, guys. Great to see you all. If I don't, happy Thanksgiving and Merry Christmas, everybody.
Well, that was a great presentation. Our next presenter, Marty Linke, is a member of ARCI and has agreed to do his first presentation today. So he's got a great story to tell about how he got involved in collecting radios, and he's going to share his experience and his collection with us. So Marty, are you ready to share your screen?
Let's see, are you all hearing me to start with? All right, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm a newbie with ARCI. I joined in April, but like David, I've been a ham radio operator for a long time, since 1976. So I've got quite a bit of electronics background, but the radio restoration bug hit me about 2-3 years ago. So I thought what I'd like to do is just take you through my journey, and let's see what happened here. So I'm a newbie, I'm a beginner, and what I'm going to do today is show you. Here's the outline of my presentation. Take you through my first radio, my second radio, electronics workbench, my garage workbench, knowledge base. Test equipment, some of my restored radios. I'm currently on the bench, and of course my ARCI article that was in the October issue. All right, this is my very first All-American 5 radio. It was a Zenith, it's a Zenith 6512. And I bought this radio. You can't quite see it on the tab, but it's on the little tab next to the radio. I bought this in March of 1996. At that time, I think it just looked cool, so I bought it. And then, of course, it sat and sat and sat for many years, either on my shelf in the office or in my entertainment cabinet at home. So that was my very first radio, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this one here in a little bit. Then many years later, I bought my second radio, and this I purchased at the Dayton Ham Radio Convention, I think sometime in the early 2000s. I can't really remember, but I thought it was a very cool looking Art Deco radio, and brought it home. I think I turned it on and it seemed to work. And then of course it sat for many years, but this time in the family room or in my bedroom, basically just as an art piece, until one evening I said, you know, it's a pretty cool looking radio. Let's plug it in and see what happens. And it was an evening time. And lo and behold, I discovered that radio works pretty darn well. It had good sensitivity, a good selectivity. It was picking up stations, you know, all over the Midwest. And I thought that was pretty cool. This is the radio that triggered my interest in restoration. So off I go. And about the same time, I discovered YouTube. And I discovered that there are people, presentation people on YouTube who specialize in restoring radios. And I quickly came to know quite a few of them. I made a list here of my favorites. Buzz 1151, David Tipton, they're in Australia. Terry Dayton from Michigan, from D-Lab, and most of you may know Terry. He travels to ARCI meetings and films the ARCI swap meets. And I got to meet him at the ARCI 2019 meeting in Itasca. So very, very nice gentleman, and I now am a regular watcher of his channel. Another fellow I like, Radio Amra, Seth in Northern California, Paul Carlson of Carlson Labs, and of course Shango 066 from Southern California. So those are my favorite YouTube video presenters I like to watch. And so I tune into those guys quite regularly. And they really, really helped me build my my knowledge base. And of course, being a ham radio operator and having an associate degree in electronics gave me a good baseline to learn and enjoy the radio restoration business, hobby rather. So off I go. I start collecting some books. I start collecting test equipment. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And I have a parts closet. Who doesn't have a parts closet? And these bends, resistors, capacitors, AC power cords, transformers, and I've collected these parts and the instruments over time. Just as I started restoring radios and I had a need for this part or this piece of test equipment, you know, you don't just go out one day and buy all this. You kind of collect it over time, and that's exactly what I did. And some books that I use occasionally, these go back to my college days. And of course, the Radio Handbook by Bill Orr. Anybody who's a ham radio operator knows Bill, of course. And I use his book for reference, and also my old college book from time to time when I can't figure out something. All right, so now, okay, so I got parts, I got a knowledge base. Where am I doing this work? Well, I dedicated my master bedroom closet, which has been doing double service as my ham radio shack. And here's a picture of it. Got the desk, the radios above, and all my tools, restoration tools, and some meters there on the right-hand side. And what's cool about having this in the closet, when you get frustrated and the job's not going the way you plan, I can walk away, close the door, and I can forget about it for a while. So that's pretty cool. Now, also, I have a workbench in the garage. This is where I do the mechanical work, the painting, the stripping. And of course, there's, 40, 50 years of tool gathering. Got a Gladiator bench, some cabinets, got the drill press, the scroll saw, and just a great collection of tools, just absolutely perfect for the radio restoration work that I do. And this again is in my garage. If you look really closely at the far right end of the picture there behind the chair are a stack of wood radios that are in the queue to be restored. I would gather there's probably about 2 years worth of work just sitting right there. So hopefully I can get to it all. Here's some of the test equipment that I've gathered. Everybody, I think, has one of these little Chinese component testers. I got a power supply. I've got a really nice vintage ICO 315 hour signal generator. And what's nice about that meter is that the face panel, the dial panel, is absolutely huge. It's about 9 inches in diameter, so it's a big instrument, but it's fun to work with. Some more equipment, signal tracer, and of course my RF signal generator, my leader, and I've got a Handtech scope digital multimeter. It's also an audio signal generator. I've got a frequency counter and an ICO capacitor tester. I've got a grid dip meter. I've got a Regal scope and a Regal function generator, which is really good for generating signals to tune the IF sections of the tube radios that I restore. Tube tester, and of course the series of handheld devices, digital multimeter, temperature gauge, function generator. And what's nice about some of these battery operated devices, especially like the function generator, you don't have to worry about isolating it from AC ground when you're trying to inject signals into high voltage areas of tube radio. So it works out very well. And of course, I've made some of my own test equipment. Here's my isolation transformer and dip bulb tester. And I also made a resistance substitute for tuning the IF in the tube radios without having to listen to the 800 or 900 megahertz tone. So that's a little device I use quite often at the end when you're tuning the IF of the radios. I also made a little FM signal generator, a broadcast generator, and I picked up this a little device at a estate sale for $1, and I attached a battery, and now I can have FM signals into all of my AM restored radios. And actually, I use it quite often. It works out pretty well. You can't go more than 4 or 5 feet away from the radio, but it does work pretty well. Also along the way, I seem to have gathered some interest in vintage analog meters. And here's just a sampling of what I've collected so far. Of course, so you have to have a VTVM, that's a triplet. And of course, all of the other analog meters that you pick up along the way at the ARCI meetings, the SWAT meetings, Hamfest. I actually even found a few at estate sales, so very interesting. And you know, the cost of these things is not really that much. You're paying $20, $30 for these, maybe. So a good deal, and they're nice to have. They're nice to have on hand. Again, some more test equipment. The multimeter on the left, I picked up at the ARCI 2019 meeting, SWAT meeting, and the Superior Instruments VOM. Another nice instrument with a huge meter. That meter is 7.5 inches in diameter. You don't have a problem seeing the indicator in the panel there. Okay, so I got test equipment, signal generators, tools. What the hell did I do with all this? I started a collection. And here it is, which I'm sitting in front of here at the moment. And those are just some of the radios that I've restored so far. So I'm just really quickly going to take you through a few of them. here we go. Got the Air King wood radio. Here's the original Arvin I talked about, another Arvin that I picked up. And Coronado. I've got a Crosley T60CL, which is a very nice radio. I picked that up at the Milwaukee Hamfest last fall. And again, Emerson, a couple Emerson radios. And of course, everybody has to have a GE. The GE 415, I picked up at the ARCI 2019 Swap Fest in August. I think I paid $5 for that. A Mecco, I picked that radio up at an estate sale. Again, estate sale pickups. Japan tube radio, kind of rare. It's rare to find a 5-tube radio that was made in Japan, but I've got that one. Motorola AM/FM radio. Of course, I got a couple of RCAs and another RCA. I have put my toe into restoring some transistor radios. Not my favorite, but I think I should continue working to build my knowledge base for both tube and transistors. Another radio that I really like, pink colored radios from the 50s seem to be very desirable. I don't remember where I picked up this one. Has a very, very unique feature. And I'm going to activate the video here. Hopefully this works. Please keep your eyes fixed to the image on the right side of your screen. Yes, that is a cigarette lighter radio. It's one of my more fun projects, fully restored. And you know, back in the day when in the 50s, when just about everybody smoked, you'd wake up in the morning, you turn the radio on, and you light your cigarette all from your bedside. Most unusual and not necessarily a good habit, but it was a fun radio to restore. Continuing on, Stuart Warner. I'm going to talk about that radio here in a minute. Westinghouse. There's the Zenith, my very, very first radio. And that was a very interesting restoration. I just did that this year. And boy, am I glad I did. You know, when I opened that up to replace the dial faceplate and discovered what was inside, the rubber wiring was just crumbly. You could almost just breathe on it and it would fall apart. So thank God I didn't operate that radio too often, but it's all restored now and working quite well. And I have another Zenith blue face there on the right. And this was the radio that I talked about a couple of meetings back. The knobs on the Zenith radio there on the right were created by a 3D printer. I think they look pretty good. Okay, so everybody has their favorites. I've got two of them. One of my very favorite radios is the Stuart Warner. It's a 9003B. It's quite a large radio. It's still tabletop, but it's a very large radio. And what I like about this radio, it has an excellent, excellent sound. If you can play music, when you play and hear music through that, the bass tones are just absolutely amazing. It's about a 7 or 8 inch speaker in that radio. It just sounds really well, and also features good sensitivity and good selectivity. My next favorite is the Zenith 6539. I bought this from a fellow in Texas. This is what the radio originally looked like. The knobs were just crumbling. And you can see on the top of the radio a cigarette burn. And of course, somebody put a hot pot of coffee right on the top of the cabinet and just destroyed the finish. So, also on the inside of the radio was a surprise that I'd never seen before. 2 layers of asbestos sheets. So I had to seal those up and get those out of there, and got rid of those pretty quickly. And here's just a view of the restored radio. On the top, I replaced the original electrolytic capacitor with a capacitor made by the good people in Hayseed, Hamfest, and Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And of course, underneath is what one of my typical restorations looks like. And here is the finished product. I really, really do like these Zenith blue face radios. This is again one of my favorites. I really enjoy this radio, and oddly enough, it's a pretty good performer. It has good sensitivity, and selectivity is not too bad. Again, one of my favorite radios. Now, currently on the bench, Dave was talking about TRF radios. I found one and I started restoring it. Here's what it looks like originally. And on the top of the chassis there, underneath all that grime, was actually a pretty good chassis until I turned it over, and you can see the video of the picture there in the center. Just an awful sight. So I decided that this was going to be an off chassis restoration. So I did it. I took it off the chassis, and there it is. The picture on the right is that radio with all the parts off the chassis. And here's the chassis with all the parts off of it in its original condition. That's about as far as I've gotten on that one. I think I have more of a challenge than I realized, but I'll have to let you know how it turns out. And then finally, I really enjoy music, and I really enjoy listening to music on the AM radio band. Of course, here in Chicagoland, there's no one station playing music, as you know, on the AM radio full time, but there are some stations playing music during the day or for a few hours in the day, sometimes in the evening. And I put together an article, which was published in the October 2021 issue of ARCI News. And I describe some of the radio stations playing music here in the Chicagoland area. And I also made a Excel spreadsheet chart, so you can actually look up a station, see if they're playing music, when, what time of day they're playing the music. And this information is published in the October issue of the ARCI News, October 21. So that's it. That's my presentation. Again, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Matt, for the opportunity, and thank you, ARCI members. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and thank you all very much.
Thanks, Marty. That was excellent. And as a new member of ARCI, that was a really good contribution to our video meetings. I really learned a lot about you personally by seeing your presentation, and I really enjoyed your collection, especially that cigarette lighter radio. That's pretty unique.
It's fun to look at, Tom, but I'm glad I'm not a smoker. I don't want to use it.
Well, you could probably use it to like shrink up some heat shrink tubing.
Oh, hey, that's an idea. That's an idea.
I wonder how many houses burned down because of that cigarette lighter.
Well, the top of that cabinet had a big gouge in it from the cigarette lighter, so I had to fix that. Came out pretty well, but that was also quite a challenge.
Anyway, I wanted to say I think you did a great job. I like your presentation, and for doing it only a short time, you sure have accomplished a lot. So
wow, thank you very much.
Quite a bit of praise to you. Thank you.
Well, it's like I said, the hobby bit me about 2 years ago, and I'm really enjoying it. I get a little frustrated during the restoration work, but when you get done and you fire up the radio and tune in some of these stations, like you hear the radio, it's really quite gratifying.
Yeah, that's great, Marty. And it looks like you've got your hands full with that pile of parts that once was a TRF. So
Um,
If I can jump in I'm sorry.
we'll see how that goes. I'm not sure yet. I may have bitten off more than I could chew.
Okay.
Well, some assembly required, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'd just like to mention before we get off of Marty's presentation that all the ARCI newsletters from the last few years are on the website. So if you don't have a paper copy or you don't have the electronic copy that I sent out of the newsletter, you can go to the website and pull up the archive and look at his article.
Yeah, that's great. Any other questions for Marty? Okay, then we'll move on to our last presenter, Tom Kleinschmidt, who is and has been doing a presentation called the Radio Preservation Series, and this is actually part 7. He's done a few of these already, and he's been working through this one radio, and we're anxious to see what he's going to do today. So, Tom, take it away.
All right. So this, as Tom mentioned, this is part 7, and the first chunk of this was on restoring the cabinet, or I won't say restoring, but fixing up, cleaning up. Second one's on the chassis. So we've been messing with the chassis. So just as a recap, this is how it looked originally. It's a 1940, 41. I every time I dig into some more data, I keep finding different dates. So let's just call it a 1940s Fada. And just my disclaimer, if you will, that I'm not going to claim to be an expert on anything. Marty's work is quite impressive, and he should be commended with all of his knowledge put to place to make those things work. And I'm sure some of the things he did are different than what I'm doing, and vice versa, but that doesn't make both of us any different from the outcome. So today we're going to measure some voltages and some interesting results. So as you recall, last time I showed you the recap chassis. And so on the left is the way I got it, and on the right is the way it is right now. Just for reference, these two big electrolytics, there was nothing wrong with them except their real estate. You couldn't get to half the components underneath it. So they got replaced with these two little guys. And just because wax capacitors tend to be wax capacitors, I replaced all of those. And that's the sum total of the parts swap. So let's get into it then. Again, in part 6, I talked about next steps, and I did test the tubes and they're all fine. I think I replaced one. And then measuring DC voltages, again, something you can easily do with an analog meter, a digital meter. It doesn't make a lot of difference. But I did have a challenge. The schematic is in Writers, and it's in Supreme Publications, which is Beitman, I forget how you pronounce that. They're identical schematics. Schreiter added some part numbers in theirs that are factory part numbers, but there are no voltages at all listed on the schematic except the AC input of being 115 or 117 volts. And so I went to the RCA tube manual and got the typical voltages for each of these tubes, because they were mostly specifically designed for 5-tube radios, so they only really have one function anyway. With the realization that most of the grid and cathode values are in milliamperes, not in volts, and so that's not an easy thing to measure, so I didn't do that, at least at this point. The schematic also didn't have any pin tube numbers, so I made a photocopy of the schematic and added those. And then the other thing, which I know but I forgot, was resistance is indicated by M versus K, and M being the Latin milli for 1,000. So I was looking at a 5M resistor, and it measured up 470K, and I went, wow, the thing is off by that much, holy smokes. And I actually put in a 5 meg resistor, and the thing still worked, believe it or not, being off by an order of 1,000. But then I had to go get my head screwed on, and there's even a note on the schematic. I was just looking at the wrong end of the diagram. I'll show you that in a minute. So anyway, remember, the old world works in milli, the new world works in K, and 1920 schematics all say M on them. I'm not sure how many 30s schematics do, but we have to get ourselves into the mindset of the people that were designing this stuff back in the day. So here is the schematic, and you'll notice what's in red are all the tube pin numbers. And right here, they actually tell you M is thousands of ohms, and look there, 500 M. And this 4 meg resistor, when they have a meg ohms, they write out meg. They don't write it out, they don't make it MM like the finance people might do it. That's how in finance they do it. It's millimilla is finance. The other thing that they shortcutted on is this rectifier tube has actually got 2 sets of elements in them that are strapped together, but they just drew it as one. So pin 3 and 5 and pin 4 and 8 are tied together because there's actually 2 rectifying elements in there. So that covers that aspect, I guess. So here's the data, and not that I need you to go memorize anything, but the stuff in yellow is the plate voltages. And if you look on any one of these, let's just use the 6SA7 up here. The data sheet says 100 to 250 volts for the plate, and that's true of all of these tubes. But I'm getting stuff in the 80s mostly, except for this triode on the second converter, which came up 57.4. So I kind of had one of those scratch your head moments because I set the AC line at 117 volts with a variac and an isolation transformer, very much like Martin did, except I don't have a light bulb in series there. But the plate voltage on the load side of the speaker coil is 90 volts. So if we go back, let me see if I can get this thing to go back. There we go. If you look, you have a 450 ohm field coil in here. That's the magnet for the speaker, also the choke for the power supply. So at this side, there's 117 volts DC, 115 volts DC. On this side, there's 90. So nothing can be higher than 90 out here, unless there's some kind of magic happening, which there isn't. So that means that all that stuff in yellow, for the most part, except for this guy, is of no concern. Grid voltages are all over the map. Here it's in range again. Here, is 2 significant over 0? Don't know. This one, again, and I think these things are falling into the same category of where the 90 volts is coming from. So again, not too concerned. But these other grids that are in this brown color, they're off by a huge amount. So that's a situation. So that's the preliminary go through on this. Again, these voltages are DC unless they're marked AC, and I only check the filament voltages for due diligence. If you look here, they're all pretty much in the ballpark. This has to do with, the exact current draw of the tube. Normally these all have the same current draw. That's why you can put them in series. And but they're going to be slightly different, and so you're going to get some variation. So, as we discussed, the 90 volt thing, the output of the rectifier matches the AC line. It actually should be a little bit lower, but in this case, it was the same. And then if you look at the tube values, there's things in series with the tubes. Let's go back to that just for a minute, just so I can see if I can find my backup thing here. It kind of blends in. At the top here, you'll notice all of the tubes, there's something in series. Here's the B plus bus, if you will. And some things are directly connected, like pin 4 here, but other things are going through like the primary, the transformer, or these IF cans. And so you're going to have some drop. And that's what that difference I'm attributing to. And then, of course, we have that one outlier of 57.4 volts, which may or may not be significant. And we talked about the grid and the heater voltages, being where they were. I don't think I can add to that too much. But here's the problem. Strong stations have a lot of background, just like their weak stations, and the audio is distorted. And I said to myself, I don't recall that when it had the wax capacitors in there. It seemed like it worked better than before I fixed it. So it's been a few months since I messed with this radio. So therefore, I'm not going to go by my lousy memory, but I do obviously have some troubleshooting to do. So that's the update for this go around. And so we can move on. So questions from anybody?
Hey, Tom, this is Keith. First off, on your you got to remember that different meters, whether it be a VOM or a digital meter or an analog type meter, is going to have a different input impedance, a DC ohm input impedance than other meters. So if you have a variance in voltages, that can be attributed to that because the loading factor of the meters is different.
Yeah, good point. Something I didn't talk about. Thanks very much. And the thing is, I'm cheating right now using a DVM, which has a different impedance than a VTVM would have.
Right. And see, if you're using a DVM, it's got a real high input impedance, so there's no load on whatever circuit you're measuring. Whereas if you use a VOM or, you know, a VTVM, it's going to have a lower input impedance, which is going to put a bigger load on the circuit itself.
Excellent. I will do some checking with a VTVM.
And it was one on your last thing. There was one other thing I was going to mention. And I forgot what it was.
Well, I'll back up. Was that what? Which last thing?
Oh, with the radio performance. That's it.
Yeah.
Also, remember which way you're putting those wax, or not the wax, but your replacement capacitors in, because of the shield, which is on the outside foil of the capacitors. That's supposed to go to the low impedance side of the radio. If you have that reversed, then that can pick up static and noise and introduce that into your radio.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was very diligent when I did it. That doesn't mean I didn't screw it up, but that's something I've been aware of for forever, I guess, when my dad taught me how to fix radios back in the day. And but that's a good point for everybody to know that outside shield needs to be, you know, if it's a bypass capacitor, that needs to be hooked to the ground side of the chassis, so it resists picking up stray signals.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. Also, I'm sorry I missed you at ARMFest too, by the way. Anyway, we'll let you go.
All right. We'll talk in December when we have a swap meet.
Well, thanks, Tom. We look forward to your next presentation to see what the mystery is all about. We've all had those.
Yeah, if it was a straight line path, it wouldn't be a challenge, would it?
That's right. So that concludes our 3 presentations for today. And the next section we're going to go into is the show and tell. And I know we have a few show and tells lined up, but before we do that, Matt's going to put up a poll to see if you are interested in giving a talk. And I encourage you to do so. As you can see, a newbie like Marty just jumped right in and made a presentation and did an excellent job. And you can do the same if you've never done one before. Or if you have, please do another one and bring it to the video meet and send us an email and we'll chat about it.
So what I have is a collection of old crystal radios from the 20s and so forth. I have about 20 of them, but I'm only going to show I grabbed 4 of them right now. I'll show them. So the first one I'm going to show is a wheat code gem. You know, it's got the whisker, the cat whisker on it, and of course the coil, and it's got a little arm down here to adjust the inductance of that coil, right here. So this is, you know, this is an early version. Nothing fancy about this. This was made by William Shever Company in New Jersey. And it seems like a lot of the crystal radios that I have came from New Jersey. So that's just, I don't know why. So that's just one of them. The second one is just a simple little, again, cat's whisker. This is the, like I said, this is just a cat whisker. Just a simple little cat whisker, no coil, but obviously you need the coil along with the cat whisker to make it all work. And these are, like I said, all from the 20s. I also have another one here, which is a manufactured unit, but it's not, I don't know what the manufacturer is of this one. But again, it's got the coil, which I can slide with this piece right here. And it also has the cat whisker. So, but I guess one of my biggest prizes is this little gem. This little gem is, a tripod that would sit on a table, and it's got the coil right here, and it's adjustable through this piece right here. And of course, you got the whisker on the top. So this is the little gem that I have. And that's the Ford that I have today. This particular one was made in 1924, I believe. So that's the date on it. And it's a little gem. And again, this is another New Jersey one. So it was made in New Jersey.
What's with the resistor sticking outside?
The resistor's hanging out the side. I was just using it for lead so I could clip on whatever I need to clip on. I was just using it for, just they were just there.
Something special you made.
Yeah, they were just right. So not that the resistors do anything. It's just I was using the lead there. So, but this is one of my favorite ones right here. It's just different looking.
Hey, Keith, have you tried to get reception on all those?
Yes, I have, and I have on all of them.
Cool.
The only one I haven't tried for reception, I should say, is this one right here. And someone just turned off my light. But that's the only one that I haven't tried yet.
Matt, are you giving him the hook? Matt, how did you do that?
I don't quite have that reach.
I think the wife just turned the light off.
Go pay your electric bill, Keith.
Yeah. So that's what happens when you're in the radio room. She leaves and turns the light off. But I'll have some more next time. I'll grab a few more.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff, Keith. I really appreciate seeing that.
Yeah, and like I said, I got the headphones, 4,000, 5,000 ohm headphones to use with them, and the three that I showed you, they all work except for that fourth one. I didn't try that one yet. I don't have a coil for it at the moment.
That's cool. Any questions for Keith? Okay, thanks, Keith, for that show and tell.
Yeah.
Any other show and tells we have right now? Okay, well, I have one. I'll share my screen here. This show and tell was inspired by Robert Lozier, who last time talked about how he made his solder look dull and old and authentic. And so my little show and tell is about a chemical that I use to do that. And occasionally, especially on the back of a radio, you have to put the back on. You got these really shiny screws, and I just think that looks silly. So I prefer to blacken up my screws, and you can paint them. You can use a Sharpie marker, but I use this stuff, which is from my work with stained glass. You can buy it in a hobby store usually, and it works great. And here you can see it, the screw being partially submerged in some of this stuff, and it's a brand new screw, nice and shiny on top, and it bubbles a little bit. You need to be careful when you handle this stuff. And then here I made a little video of this bubbling away, and you can see that the action kind of takes some of the plating off and whatever else is on the surface of the screw. And and it's kind of messy. So you gotta, I wear latex gloves when I do this, but you need to clean this residue off and I soak it in some water. And then when you're done, you got a nice black screw. And they also have one that's a copper patina that,
Hey, Tom, isn't that prone to rust then unless you clear coat it with a mat?
you should. It'll rub off, but the screws, they seem to, if they're not in a high friction environment, they'll stay like that. But yeah, on a stained glass piece, you would put some wax on it or clear coat it. But so that was inspired by Robert. And Robert, I don't know what that stuff you had. It was like for gunsmithing or something.
It's used in the jewelry trades and art metalwork.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got a quick item. This is Keith. Yeah, I'm looking for Litz wire. I did put the information in the chat, but I am looking for Litz wire, the wire that you would see on loop sticks or any kind of loops. It's a real fine wire. There might be however many strands on a cloth covered wire, which would be enameled. But anyway, I'm looking for, not 2 feet or 3 feet. I'm looking for quite a bit of Litz wire, whatever I can get. So that's what I'm looking for.
Well, there's a couple of sites for crystal set hobbyists, and on one of those you'll hit on a guy that that's his thing, is supplying materials for crystal sets. And I've gotten Litz wire. You can get like 128 strand Litz wire that's maybe a 10 gauge wire, and it costs a gazillion dollars. But if you're looking for like 30 gauge and stuff like that, then it's pretty affordable. Well, I have one thing along that line is double cotton covered 24 gauge DCC 24 gauge. That's what people need to rewind the RF coils on Atwater Kent breadboards. I've just redone those the coils on a breadboard for this little radio museum in Asheville, and so I've about run out of more wire to do that task with. Also, you can go to tubesandmore.com, which I'm pretty sure that most of you have been to before, also called Antique Electronics Supply. They have a 24 gauge double Celanese cut covered wire that they claim can be dyed. Well, I got that wire in because it comes in sort of a pinkish white. And I came in and saw that it doesn't dye green at all. And so I'm a little unhappy with that. But if you got the real deal in cotton, let me know.
Yeah, unfortunately, what I've got is all just enameled wire by the roll full.
I put up this place called Mike's Electronic Parts. I don't know if you can see that. I recently bought some Litz wire from them, and they had everything in stock, and they got all kinds of it. I mean, and it's pretty cheap, and you can get the really fine stuff. And the nomenclature here is you can get 550 strands of 46 gauge wire. And you can get it in different colors. And they got 4 pages of this stuff. And there's a little helpful guide here too on what frequency band you're trying to work, I think. Or maybe I saw that somewhere else, but I found this very helpful, and prices were reasonable. I put that in the chat window.
Thank you.
That concludes our presentation and show and tell portions of our video meeting.